Jack Smith is in the midst of packing his things today. And the left is very angry about it. Daily Beast headline, Jack Smith's cases against Trump end with a whimper. And then Axios reports that a judge has granted Jack Smith's request to pause Trump's federal January 6th case. They say it's likely the first step, actually, in ending the prosecutions against the president-elect, who they add is the first convicted felon to win the White House. Yeah, that's why I voted for him. Joining us now, Julie Kelly is on the phone. She's the author of Declassified by Julie Kelly, the Substack, and also the book January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, good to have you back with us.
Vince, thank you so much for having me on before Kurt Schlichter. Oh, my God, I'd never be on.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, we wouldn't be able to get to you. I'd be laughing too hard. It's too much. So we're pacing. We're ramping up, Julie.
Kurt. I love Kurt. He's a friend.
He's so good. All right. So Jack Smith was telling us that he's not considering the election at all. He's got to prosecute Trump without regard at all for Election Day. Then Election Day comes and goes. Trump wins. And now Jack Smith says, well, I'm done now. What does that tell you?
Well, of course, it tells us what we already know, that this was a purely political prosecution. 2 unprecedented criminal indictments. Of course, the case in Washington, the January 6th related case, 4-count indictment that was heavily gutted after the Supreme Court ruling in presidential immunity. And then the other criminal and federal indictment in the District of Southern Florida for so-called hoarding classified documents. That indictment, however, was dismissed by Judge Cannon in July, finding that Jack Smith had been unconstitutionally appointed. So today what happens? Jack Smith moves to vacate deadlines that Judge Tanya Chutkan set on October 28th. Think about this. A week before the election, Judge Chutkan is setting pretrial deadlines in the Washington, D.C. case into late December. This is how brazen she is and desperate to try to get this to trial, thinking maybe that Kamala Harris would win and this case would continue on. Regardless now, so she set all these deadlines into late December. Today, after Jack Smith moves to vacate those deadlines, she immediately grants his motion. The case is over in D.C. Now what we will watch for next is DOJ going to the appellate court in Florida in the 11th Circuit and pulling back their appeal of Judge Cannon's order, which means her order concluding that he was unconstitutionally appointed will stand and should serve for part of congressional or Senate investigations into the overall corrupt prosecution, the prosecutorial misconduct and abuse that I saw, that we saw in Jack Smith's team, by Jack Smith's team.
You know, if a federal official violates the Constitution, as we've established that Merrick Garland did by appointing Jack Smith, if Jack Smith pretends to be a federal officer, impersonates one, which is what he's doing as the, quote, special counsel, shouldn't there be actual criminal consequences for violating the Constitution and violating the law?
I believe so. I think that that's a good issue that's been raised by others. And, of course, Judge Cannon fleshed this out in her 95-page order in July, but Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas also addressed this in the presidential immunity order that came down on July 1st. And there are others, former attorney generals, Mike Mukasey, and, too many names flying around, who also believe that Merrick Garland's appointment of Jack Smith was unconstitutional based on the fact that he is a superior officer, and anyone in that position should have been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Every other special counsel has been approved by the U.S. Senate in their capacity as U.S. attorneys. Robert Mueller had been approved by the Senate as FBI director. Jack Smith, for some reason, plucked from The Hague by Merrick Garland. This guy is the biggest stone cold loser in DOJ history. Let's just take a moment and realize he lost the Bob McDonnell case, the corruption case, overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court. He didn't get a single conviction in his politically motivated prosecution of former Senator John Edwards. He didn't get a conviction in the first indictment prosecution of former Senator Robert Menendez. He was rebuked by the Supreme Court 3 times this year. He tried to jump over the D.C. appellate court. to get the Supreme Court immediately to rule on immunity. They said, no, go back to the appellate court. That's the normal process. Then, of course, he was rebuked in the immunity question. And the Fisher ruling, which dealt with 1512C2, obstruction of an official proceeding, which represents 2 of the 4 counts in his J6 indictment against Donald Trump. If he was, a baseball player, he would be sent back to, he would be cut. He wouldn't even be sent back to, A-League. He'd be gone. But there has to be consequences for what he's done in both of these cases, Vince, especially the classified documents, which I've reported on. I was in the courthouse numerous times. Evidence of the team and investigators, prosecutors mishandling, doctoring, and possibly destroying evidence, misleading the court, Judge Cannon, pressuring, intimidating witnesses, trying to get one of the co-defendants, a close personal aide of Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, to flip and become a government cooperator, threatening both him and his attorney, and many other instances of malfeasance in that case. Jack Smith will have spent $50 million in 2 years on these criminal indictments to torment Donald Trump, his associates, 2 of his co-defendants in Florida, and now comes up empty-handed yet again.
It's amazing. And it's funny, I'm watching the left react with all sorts of varying degrees of panic now that President Trump has actually won re-election. I'm see these segments are popping up on MSNBC and CNN, of course, the usual places where they're complaining. They're like, oh, no, Trump's going to be able to take over the Justice Department. Oh, no. What if he goes after Jack Smith? And if he does that, that'll be so unfair because imagine having the resources of the federal government trained on you. They could drain you financially. And I'm sitting listening to all this going, are you serious? You can't be serious as you make arguments like this. This is literally what you're doing to not just President Trump, but people who voted for him, people who supported him, people who rallied for him, people who worked with him at Mar-a-Lago, going after with Walt Nauta. I mean, the people whose lives have been destroyed by this regime. And for these people to go on television and be like, oh, man, imagine what would it be like to be on the receiving end of that.
I know. It's just hilarious. They expect us to not believe our own eyes over the last 4 years, over the last near decade. And, the problem is people like Robert Mueller and Andrew Weissman had no consequences for the made-up Russia collusion investigation that really heavily disabled the first half of Trump's term last time. And there were no consequences at all. There have to be consequences for what Jack Smith did, because what he did, of course, was far more egregious, bringing these 2 unprecedented criminal indictments that had no substance to them whatsoever. The J6 indictment, 4 counts, 3 very vague conspiracy counts, and then, of course, the obstruction, post-Enron obstruction one that was gutted by the Supreme Court, and then the classified documents one, where they still cannot prove that what Donald Trump had, his files that he had, were top secret national defense information. Joe Biden did. We still have no evidence, aside from the word of the DOJ, that that's what they found at Mar-a-Lago. And then obstructing justice, which clearly he did not. He was over cooperating with first the National Archives and then DOJ. But what really happened in that Florida case, and that's why Judge Cannon, towards the end, they were having full-up blow-ups in that courtroom between the judge and Jack Smith's prosecutors, Jay Brad and David Harbach. David Harbach having full-on temper tantrums because she was allowing the unsealing of documents, including the FBI raid plan of Mar-a-Lago, which revealed armed agents, unidentified armed agents who clearly violated the very broad terms of the search warrant, ransacking Melania's room, ransacking Barron's room, for no other reason than to continue the torment of that family.
Yes.
There has to be accountability and consequences for what they did, not just to Trump and his family, but the American people, deceiving us to believe that Donald Trump committed crimes in 2 separate jurisdictions when he committed no crimes in either place.
It was tyrannical, partisan political theater is what it was. And they raid Mar-a-Lago in a very public way, guns on FBI agents. And the whole point is to try and convince the public that he's a criminal and he's being treated like a criminal. It was disgraceful. And now they're just going to wrap it up. Now they're just going to, we got to go. I guess we're not going to be able to do this anymore.
No, that cannot happen. I'm talking to people, officials who want more information and want to pursue finally a lot of inquiry and investigation into what happened here. We also need it to the J6 Select Committee, and of course, we cannot have to put at the top of the list the political persecution of the J6ers, more than 1,500 Americans tormented by the state. DOJ.
Are you expecting pardons for most or all of the J6ers?
Yes.
Okay, so and they are too. I'm seeing some headlines. The Daily Caller doing some coverage in the last. What's the number? Did you just say 1,500?
More than 1,500 now charged by this DOJ. Can you believe it, Vince? The FBI arrested a man in Georgia on Tuesday, on Election Day in a swing state, for his participation in the events of January 6th. It's still ongoing.
I noticed. In fact, if you look at all of the stupid Jack Smith tweets leading up to Election Day, it was bragging about how they're still hurting people from January 6th of 2021. They were still doing it. In case you were wondering if it's election interference, they were explicitly doing it just in the days leading up to this election. Now, as far as the FBI is concerned, my buddy Carrie Pickett over at the Washington Times has a great piece today. She says, FBI brass stunned and shell-shocked over Trump re-election. She writes that the brass on the 7th floor at FBI headquarters in Washington are walking around in a daze and wary of a house cleaning since President-elect Donald Trump won his re-election on Tuesday, according to inside sources. The Washington Times learned through several anonymous bureau sources that senior executives who run the agency were stunned and shell-shocked by Mr. Trump's victory over Vice President Kamala Harris. One FBI source saying, the fit test, how they let the standard slack on the fit test, referring to the agency's physical fitness requirements. Everyone's going to have a real problem when they're running for the door. So here you have the FBI. Do you expect President Trump is going to take a meat cleaver to the top of the FBI?
Has to. If Christopher Wray does not resign before January 20th, Donald Trump has to do what he did not do to Jim Comey when he took office, and that is fire him immediately. I don't care if an FBI director really usually has a 10-year term. First of all, that should be changed as well. The FBI director should be like any other head of a major department. You serve at the will of the president. Yeah. You can be appointed and confirmed and fired at any point. He needs to immediately fire Chris Wray if Chris Wray does not do the right thing and resign. There's a very good chance he won't, because he's going to want to do as much as he can to cover up the corruption of the FBI. And for those top officials at J. Edgar Hoover Building and the Washington field office, look in the mirror. This vote for Donald Trump, especially by hardcore MAGA Republicans, is as much of an indictment of you and your corruption, your weaponization of a once trusted agency. Think of the Gallup poll that came out. 20% of Republicans trust the Department of Justice. 22% trust the FBI. I want to know who those 22 are. I need to have a chat with them. Now, I think some of them don't respond honestly because they're afraid of their own government. That's an institution destroying number there. And that is just the beginning of what has to happen at the FBI. House cleaning at the top, getting rid of every single head of the 56 FBI field offices. They have been part of this January 6th prosecution as well. And then figure out what you're going to do with that bureau, because it has turned its power and its authority, unchecked authority, against the American half of the country, and it just cannot stand. Yeah,
and of course the president should control the FBI. What insane person thought he shouldn't? Because the American people, that's the guy who's responsive to them. And in the end, if the president says, I want you to direct your resources to going after child sex traffickers, I want you to direct your resources to stopping the fentanyl crisis, I want you to direct all these resources to helping Americans. If the president says that, that's your obligation to do it. And it's insane that we thought we could just invent a fourth branch of government, because look how out of control it's become. And I know you've been covering it for so long. Julie Kelly, thank you as always for just being great at everything, and good to talk to you again as always.